A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Book the First, Recalled to Life. Chapter 4, The Preparation. When the mail got successfully to Dover, in the course of the forenoon, the head drawer at the Royal George Hotel opened the coach door as his custom was. He did it with some flourish of ceremony, for a mail journey from London in winter was an achievement to congratulate an adventurous traveller upon. But by that time, there was only one adventurous traveller left to be congratulated, for the other two had been set down at their respective roadside destinations. The mildewy inside of the coach, with its damp and dirty straw, its disagreeable smell, and its obscurity, was rather like a larger sort of dog kennel. Mr. Lorry, the passenger, shaking himself out of it in chains of straw, a tangle of shaggy wrapper, flapping hat, and muddy legs, was rather like a larger sort of dog. "There will be a packet of Calais tomorrow, drawer?" "Yes, sir, if the weather holds and the wind sets tolerable fair. The tide will serve pretty nicely at about 2 in the afternoon, sir. Bed, sir? I shall not go to bed till night, but I want a bedroom and a barber. And then breakfast, sir. Yes, sir, that way, sir, if you please. Show Concord? Gentlemen's valise, hot water to Concord. Pull off gentlemen's boots in Concord. You will find a fine sea-coal fire, sir. Fetch barber to Concord. Stir about there. Now, for Concord!" The Concord bedchamber being always assigned to a passenger by the mail, and passengers by the mail being always heavily wrapped up from head to foot, the room had an odd interest for the establishment of the Royal George, that although but one kind of man was seen to go into it, all kinds and varieties of men came out of it. Consequently, another drawer and 2 porters and several maids and the landlady were all loitering by accident at various points of the road between the Concord and the coffee-room, when a gentleman of 60, formally dressed in a brown suit of clothes, pretty well worn but very well kept, with large square cuffs and large flaps to the pockets, passed along on his way to breakfast. The coffee-room had no other occupant that forenoon than the gentleman in brown. His breakfast table was drawn before the fire, and as he sat, with its light shining on him, waiting for the meal, he sat so still that he might have been sitting but for his portrait. Very orderly and methodical he looked, with a hand on each knee, and a loud watch ticking a sonorous sermon under his flapped waistcoat, as though it pitted its gravity and longevity against the levity and evanescence of the brisk fire. He had a good leg, and was a little vain of it, for his brown stockings fitted sleek and close, and were of a fine texture. His shoes and buckles, too, though plain, were trim. He wore an odd little sleek, crisp, flaxen wig, setting very close to his head, which wig, it is to be presumed, was made of hair, but which looked far more as though it were spun from filaments of silk or glass. His linen, though not of a fineness in accordance with his stockings, was as white as the tops of the waves that broke upon the neighboring beach, or the specks of sail that glinted in the sunlight far at sea. A face habitually suppressed and quieted was still lighted up under the quaint wig by a pair of moist bright eyes that it must have cost their owner in years gone by some pains to drill to the composed and reserved expression of Tellson's Bank. He had a healthy color in his cheeks, and his face, though lined, bore very few traces of anxiety, but perhaps the confidential bachelor clerks in Tellson's Bank were principally occupied with the cares of other people, and perhaps second-hand cares, like second-hand clothes, come easily off and on. Completing his resemblance to a man who was sitting for his portrait, Mr. Lorry dropped off asleep. The arrival of his breakfast roused him, and he said to the drawer, as he moved his chair to it, "I wish accommodation prepared for a young lady who may come here at any time today. She may ask for Mr. Jarvis Lorry, or she may ask for a gentleman from Tellson's Bank. Please let me know." "Yes, sir. Tellson's Bank in London, sir." "Yes, sir. We have oftentimes the honour to entertain your gentlemen in their travelling backwards and forwards betwixt London and Paris, sir. A vast deal of travelling, sir, in Telson and Company's house. Yes, we are quite a French house as well as an English one. Yes, sir, not much in the habit of travelling yourself, I think, sir. Not of late years. It is 15 years since I last came to from France. Indeed, sir. That was before my time, sir, before our people's time here, sir. But George was in other hands at that time, sir. I believe so. But I would hold a pretty wager, sir, that a house like Telson and Company was flourishing a matter of 50, not to speak 15 years ago. You might treble that, and say 150, yet not be far from the truth. Indeed, sir! Rounding his mouth at both ends as he stepped backwards from the table, the waiter shifted his napkin from his right arm to his left, dropped into a comfortable attitude, and stood surveying the guest while he ate and drank, as from an observatory or watchtower, according to the immemorial usage of waiters in all ages. When Mr. Lorry had finished his breakfast, he went out for a stroll on the beach. The little narrow, crooked town of Dover hid itself away from the beach, and ran its head into the chalk cliffs like a marine ostrich. The beach was a desert of heaps of sea and stones tumbling wildly about, and the sea did what it liked, and what it liked was destruction. It thundered at the town, and thundered in the cliffs, and brought the coast down madly. The air among the houses was of so strong a piscatory flavor that one might have supposed sick fish went up to be dipped in it, as sick people went down to be dipped in the sea. A little fishing was done in the port, and a quantity of strolling about by night, and looking seaward, particularly at those times when the tide made and was near flood. Small tradesmen who did no business whatsoever sometimes accountably realized large fortunes, and it was remarkable that nobody in the neighborhood could endure a lamplighter. As the day declined into the afternoon, and the air, which had been at intervals clear enough to allow the French coast to be seen, became again charged with mist and vapor, Mr. Lorry's thoughts seemed to cloud too. When it was dark, and he sat before the coffee-room fire, awaiting his dinner, as he had awaited his breakfast, his mind was busily digging in the live red coals. A bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm, otherwise than as he has a tendency to throw him out of work. Mr. Lorry had been idle a long time, and had just poured out his last glassful of wine, with as complete an appearance of satisfaction as is ever to be found in an elderly gentleman of a fresh complexion, who had got to the end of a bottle, when a rattling of wheels came up the narrow street, and rumbled into the inn-yard. He set down his glass untouched. "This is Mamselle," he said. In a very few minutes the waiter came in to announce that Miss Manette had arrived from London, and would be happy to see this gentleman from Tellson's. So soon? Miss Manette had taken some refreshment on the road, and required none then, and was extremely anxious to see the gentleman from Tellson's immediately, if it suited his pleasure and convenience. The gentleman from Tellson's had nothing left for it but to empty his glass with an air of stolid desperation, settle his odd little flaxen wig at his ears, and follow the waiter to Miss Manette's apartment. It was a large, dark room, furnished in a funeral manner, with black horsehair, and loaded with heavy dark tables. These had been oiled and oiled until the two tall candles on the table in the middle of the room were gloomily reflected on every leaf, as if they were buried in deep graves of black mahogany, and no light to speak of could be expected from them until they were dug out. The obscurity was so difficult to penetrate that Mr. Lorry, picking his way over the well-worn Turkey carpet, supposed Miss Manette to be, for the moment, in some adjacent room, until, having got past the two tall candles, he saw, standing to receive him by the table between them and the fire, a young lady of not more than 17 in a riding cloak, and still holding her straw travelling hat by its ribbon in her hand. As his eyes rested on a short, slight, pretty figure, a quantity of golden hair, a pair of blue eyes that met his own with an inquiring look, and a forehead with a singular capacity, remembering how young and smooth it was, of lifting and knitting itself into an expression that was not quite one of perplexity or wonder or alarm, or merely of a bright fixed attention, though it included all the four expressions. As his eyes rested on these things, a sudden vivid likeness passed before him of a child whom he had held in his arms on the passage across that very channel, one cold time, when the hail drifted heavily and the sea ran high. The likeness passed away, say, like a breath, along the surface of a gaunt pier-glass behind him, on the frame of which a hospital procession of Negro cupids, several headless and all cripples, were offering black baskets of Dead Sea fruit to black divinities of the feminine gender, and he made his formal bow to Miss Manette. "Pray take a seat, sir," in a very clear and pleasant young voice, a little foreign in its accent, but a very little indeed. "I kiss your hand, miss," said Mr. Lorry, with the manners of an earlier date, and he made his formal bow again and took his seat. "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday, informing me that some new intelligence or discovery—" "The word is not material, miss. Either word will do." "Respecting the small property of my poor father, whom I never saw, so long dead." Mr. Lorry moved to his chair and cast a troubled look toward the hospital procession of Negro cupids. If they had any help for anybody, as if they had any help for anybody in their absurd baskets. And that's where we'll pause.